us. Yeah.
You, Brother Kwame.
Yeah, Brother Pigeon, which Brother Kwame? Because there are two Kwames here. There's Kwame Gonza and there's which one?
Brother Christian Kwame Agoza.
Thank you. Uh, okay, I'd like to welcome everyone to our Saturday class today. So welcome Bernadette, Brother Kwame Gonza, Brother Thomas, Brother David, Senator Komichi, Brother Pigeon yourself, and Brother Fukua, who is present today. Let's remind ourselves why we are here in this presentation. We are here because we believe that Africa will be better off with one continental government instead of 55. That's why we are here. And we are here also because this is part of us initiating a conversation around the unification of Africa. And in the sense that we believe that there's not enough discussion going on amongst ordinary Africans about the unification of Africa. There isn't enough. People are not talking about it enough. And yet we believe that it is the most important thing on the Pan-Africanist table that 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 ordinary Africans are talking about this. I mean, as we speak here, the North Africans are not even involved in our conversations. The WhatsApp groups that have been formed by a lot of sub-Saharan Africans do not include, for instance, Egyptians, Algerians, Libyans, Tunisians, and so on. So it is as if even the discussions going on are only between sub-Saharan Africans. But we need to start talking to the North Africans as well, and that is not happening. And but having said that, there is not enough conversation going on. So Constantism Study Group has put on the Saturday class specifically to get us to talk about the unification of Africa. And we have been lucky to have amongst us our own brother who we love very much, Brother Fukua, who originally is from Cameroon but lives in Ghana. And he has been presenting to us on something called the Knights Templars, which is a secret organization. And what Brother Fukua has been really getting at over the weeks, so it's now on session 4, is that there is a shadow, what you would call a shadow government, which is a group of people who do not live in transparency and who are directing our governments. And so we have governments on the continent, call them neo-colonial governments, but who are not doing the will of the African people. All these disputes about elections are to do with really disputes in the background between the shadow governments and actors. And so that is what is happening. And this shadow government, as Brother Fukua has been slowly exposing them to us. And for the fact that they wear badges, for instance. You can see the badges they wear that gives them the way and so on and so forth. And Brother Fukua has traced the origin of the current neo-colonial regime in terms of this secret society. And he's continuing that today with what is on your screen, section 4, the order of the temple. And in the last presentation, he linked it with money, how money or finance comes in. And as you know, at the end of the day, it's always about the money. If you follow the money, a lot of things become clear. So Brother Fukua is going to be presented for us. Last week, our own Brother Pigeon presented for us on Matigari, and in due course, Brother Pigeon will also present the part 2 of Matigari, a freedom fighter. We have also Brother Senator, a commissioner of Zimbabwe, who also will present to us at some point. So thank you all for coming. The time is 7:43, and Brother Fukua will speak for about at least half an hour, after which we'll open the floor for discussions. Thank you all for coming. Brother Fukua.
Yes, thank you very much. It's to give everyone a very good evening and a welcome. We don't want to delay with time, of course, because like we pointed out in our last presentation, we did look rightly at the Knights Templar, and we discovered from it, shockingly, that it was a quasi-Christian military order that was established as a branch of the Roman Catholic Church that went on to found the modern banking system and political structure of Europe by means of being responsible for keeping the wealth and finances of kings and queens, as well as people who wanted to travel to what they called the Holy Lands in Palestine, as well, even from wars, of course, which is something we've discovered today when we call names like Halliburton. We have to understand, as a militaristic wing of the church, the Crusades, these groups were able to amass themselves well as well through looting Muslim lands, conquering cities, gathering artifacts and things of that nature, such that what we're going to start looking at today is that in its core, when it was founded in Europe, the original Knights Templar branch, though we discovered when it was dissolved, they broke in. Specifically, they were formed. That's why it's extremely important that now we look at this idea of the Order of the Temple, which was started by Bernard Raymond Fabio Palapat, who actually served under Napoleon. As we left the last discussion, we were talking keenly about Napoleon and the fact that it was his reign and becoming the emperor of Europe, climbing to the helm of France and then conquering all of Europe, and then removing the Pope. We have to always keep this fact clearly in mind. I think it was 1809, Napoleon removed the Pope, arrested him, showing that at his height of Freemasonic authority and the way he'd established his empire in Europe, even the Vatican that we had seen come from the authority of Constantine was also checked in Europe. So we're already getting into the slides. I think we'll just dive into it so that we start to build this relationship. Pardon. Okay, I don't know if that was a comment, but we'll just start building the slides. I said we're already getting into the discussion there, and it's good that everyone, of course, is also able to look at their screen. We're asking Knights Templarism first or Freemasonry, because that's always the big question. We talk a lot about Knights Templarism, and then along the way we start talking about Freemasonry. So what is really the relationship? Are they separate or different than actually one another? And the truth of the matter is that by the traditions I was able to look at conclusively, both Knights Templar traditions in Europe or modern Freemason traditions in Europe, as well as continentally in Europe. And when I'm saying continental Europe, I mean France as opposed to Britain specifically, and what happened in Scotland and the UK, they all do acknowledge that the French tradition of Freemasonry originated out of Knights Templars, who, when there was the persecution and banning of the group in, I think it was around 1307, the group of Templars spread into different areas, not just where they dissolved into groups the Catholic Church accepted, but into Sweden, the branches also went, and even as far as Scotland, where in Scotland now, they became the Freemasons. That is what the history we were able to actually look at starts to evolve. And it's from this group of Templars that went into Scotland and became now Freemasons. They were able now to come back to France eventually and reestablish now what became Neo-Templar groups that are emerged out of Freemasonry. So all of this is what brings us a balance when we're questioning what is the difference or the relationship that we have to understand as we'll be going along, that Freemasonry actually was born out of Knights Templarism. Now, here we just have essentially a tracing of the large tradition going back at least to 1598 specifically. We always have to note that year because the oldest lodge known on the face of the planet in this tradition on the face of the planet traces specifically to Scotland. And we point out the year first, 1598, so that any year coming after it will point in that direction. Of course, we know there was a lodge founded in 1723, which the Grand Orient Lodge today traces its history back to, which is also noted inside this list. And we're talking about the Grand Orient lodges of France, which we'll start to get into eventually. So start to realize that they had a Grand Lodge tradition that they trace back to the English relationship. But when it actually became officially like a unified independent body, bringing all of the different groups in France together, only starts to become visualized as from 1733. So what we see now is that eventually they recognize this amalgamation of different lodges in France and those in the rest of Europe as the Grand Orient Lodge of France eventually. And this is when Napoleon now retakes his authority over the entire Masonic body, because they speak a lot about him successfully unifying the French Grand Lodges and the lodges in the Orient, because throughout the entire continental Europe, there were other Freemasonic lodges aside from those in France. Now, specifically what distinguishes the two is that they have an observance called the Scottish strict observance. And then they have also the continental form of Freemasonry, which is practiced in France. Now, according to the Scottish strict observance, what's important to remember about it is that the Freemasonic lodges that keep this tradition, what they actually do is they don't practice a lot of what they would consider mysticism, because it seems that when Napoleon went and invaded Egypt and the Arabian lands, there were documents and things that manuscripts, a lot of, they say that Napoleon to an extent was an occult, and that a lot of the French military had some type of affinity for, I don't like the word occult specifically, but I like to use more esoteric knowledge, because it would be labeled occult in the context of the interpretation of the Vatican and the Christian church being opposed to knowledge which is not Christian. So we see that what Napoleon actually did, before we're talking about the strict observance, is that Napoleon opened up spiritual studies in Europe through him rising to this level and establishing his empire on the basis of Freemasonry. So because of that, there was a schism inside the English lodges that had originally started to establish Freemasonry on continental Europe again, that broke off into what would be known as the strict observance. A lot of places you'll hear of something called the Scottish Rite Freemasonry. And specifically what they tried to do is they use a lot more of the Christian iconography that would have been related to the Knights Templarism, which we see now removed from a lot of the Freemasonic lodges, because in the Knights Templar traditions, you would see men wearing capes with a lot of crosses, using a lot of swords, wearing medieval regalia. That is their type of tradition. But in Freemasonry, it goes more into individuals. Like what do we see Napoleon essentially do by bringing the king down, bringing the Pope down? He raised a level of the French Republic, the common man, the soldiers, to a level where they could interact politically and be able to participate in the whole governance and evolution of Europe. If you really look at that, so that is what the French Revolution symbolized, because when they removed Louis XVI, that spirit of the rights of man, it spread to America. America also had their revolution. All of these successive revolutions started because of what started in France. And it was being inspired by this Protestant type of inspiration, could we call it, being born out of Freemasonry, such that in the context of all of these different lodges that were being born and allowing individuals in France and throughout Europe to essentially express themselves outside of the church. Now, we come to this idea of the Order of the Temple, because we've talked about Knights Templarism, and we know that there are different Knights Templar groups. Now that we've looked at Freemasonry reviving this tradition, but not strictly in a knight sense, an order emerged in France in 1804 that actually was called the Order of the Temple, and it was founded by an individual called Raymond Bernard Palapat, who, as far as credentials are concerned, so that we should know that this order had its repute in the French kingdom under Napoleon. It was given recognition as an order of chivalry specifically by Napoleon in 1805. And it's well known that Raymond Bernard was of close interaction in the court of Napoleon. So he comes into play, because what we're going to start seeing is that even with this Order of the Temple, you see, outside of the Catholic tradition, there's there are some origins that these different lodges in France are able to use outside of the strict observance of the English tradition, that allows them to fabricate some type of a traditional basis, like we start to see in this slide. Raymond Bernard, to establish his Order of the Temple, actually, they say he fabricated. That's why I say he allegedly presented a manuscript in 324 CE called the L'Arminius, it's taking the L'Arminius Charter essentially. And the L'Arminius Charter, inside it, what it does is it makes a claim that from the time that we had understood Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, had died from being in prison under the Roman Catholic Church, the document claimed that Raymond Bernard Fabul Palaprat, after a line of 22 Grand Masters, following a gentleman named Johann Marcus L'arminius, who received this successorship directly from Jacques de Molay, that Faber Palapat was the only Grand Master of all of the Knights Templar orders in all of Europe. This was a grand claim that he made, but you must understand at this time, with Napoleon having this authority and his close proximity to the relationship of what Napoleon was establishing in the empire over Europe, the idea actually, it just had diffuse and go. And according to the Scottish Templars inside this document, now they were excommunicated by L'Arminius specifically in 324. And we start to see that now that's where the schism with them wanting to hold on to the Catholic and the old Knights Templar tradition and what they were writing into this, you could say, yes, what they looked at as this relic and accepted it in its value to actually mean, because Napoleon now was creating a basis for recognition of his empire outside of not just the political authority of the church, and even understanding that what had been established as masonry in France was from England. He was creating now a structure of masonry for France, which would have, even if he had to create a legendary foundation, this is what Faber Palapat supplied to Napoleon's French Empire. And along with it, it came complete with claims that he also had the sword of Jacques de Molay in his archives. And it's these type of relics that when they present, it's not just in this particular tradition of the Knights, but if you read these traditions of all of these lodges, you'll start to see that they have relics, they have charters, and they have complications and conflicts, as we're still going to see in subsequent slides, where they break out of each other and make different groups. And it's that fabrication of groups that eventually leads throughout the years to what is established here now in Africa. So in our next slide, we look at the idea. We already talked about the Grand Orient of France earlier. So we just clearly see in this slide that it was founded according to when they went to pinpoint specific years in 1773 out of the Grand Lodge of France, which is the oldest collective Freemasonic organization operating in France and the oldest in Europe. This fact has to be clearly understood as we'll be going along, so that we'll see how, whether it was Germany, whether it was Italy, whether it was Spain, all these areas which were conquered by Napoleon, there was influence from the tradition that he had established, culminating in what we see termed as the Grand Orient de France, which they would say it briefly absorbed the Grand Lodge of France, which was the collective of independent Freemasonic lodges that they say had also evolved from the English foundations in the early 1700s into this grand now organization of continental French Freemasonry under the authority of Napoleon Bonaparte. Then this is our man, the great Raymond Bernard, or is it Bernard Raymond Fabul Palapat, who was a Catholic priest, actually. He was ordained at the seminary in Cahors, Commune of France, and he left the priesthood actually to study medicine, which allowed him to rise to the level of eventually being the director of medicine in the Société Médico-Philanthropique, which by that time in 1803 was when we reason and see that Napoleon now had already become the first consul in 1799 and was rising to eventually become the emperor. So this Société Médico-Philanthropique is a very prominent organization in France, because when they want to trace back their system of philanthropy, they don't really have like NGOs and structures which the government has always allowed to freely allow private individuals to do contributions to charity. It was from organizations like this which their concept of giving free will organization contributions to charitable organizations actually even evolved with, just to add some side relevance to the structure of this organization. And Fabio Palapat specifically, he received the Legion of Honor medal for his defense of Paris in 1814. And that's the medal, incidentally, which also Napoleon wears on his left breast, not specifically the one which resembles the Knights Templar Maltese cross, but there's another smaller one next to it that has a ribbon on it. And we're just using this to give you that comparison. You see individuals even after that point in history receiving that medal and honor. It's still in this tradition. Now, Fabo Palapat also created something called the Johannite Church, which in this structure, he appointed an individual by the name of Ferdinand Francois Chateau, that he would actually act as like the Pope or supreme leader of this organization. And because this organization was created in France now, and we're seeing that through Napoleon's Templar organization, they created a kind of rival structure to the Roman Catholic Church. This Johannite Church in France and over the continental Europe was the structure that Napoleon established through Fabo Palapat as the rival to the Roman Catholic Church. And specifically, it was called the French Catholic Church, the Église Catholique Française. Fabo Palapat himself specifically declared that he was the sovereign pontiff of the primitive Catholic religion, which, like we just pointed out, he made him in opposition to the Church of St. Peter in Rome. Now, all of it was based on a text, which, incidentally, like we said, they'll be throwing at you these odd relics that either they discovered or they fabricate. He created a text, right? Not actually created a text, but he found a text that he put into circulation called the Leviticon. And in the Leviticon, essentially, he says that he bought it in a store in Paris in a secondhand bookstall in 1814. And then he translated out of it that it had some counter teachings to what the Roman Catholic Church teaches. Specifically, some people will believe it and accept it, but like we pointed out, there's a Gnostic version of the Gospel of John in which he omits the resurrection from the narrative. And so we see that actually the tradition of Masonry that would evolve with this would have certain counter teachings to what the Roman Catholic Church accepts to be orthodox. These are the things that will create now conflict in this organization, such that you start to see schisms and what we're calling the factions start to break out of the group, really, because we see that what Bernard Raymond did is he created essentially a foundation in France for a counter interpretation of what would become the Freemasonic traditions, as opposed to not only the Roman Catholic Church, which had established its authority since the 4th century, but also counter to the Scottish tradition. Now, inside it now, because of the way that it was structured, eventually in 1836, there was a divide in the Order of the Temple, which was led by a gentleman called Duc de Choiseul, which resulted because there was a dissatisfaction with the new Johannite Church that had replaced some of the previous chivalric style, that's the Knights Templar order style of teachings, into it. Now, Fabo Palapat, he responded to this by actually admitting Sir Sidney Smith, who he would then use to take over the Johannite Church and then oppose the individual Duc de Choiseul. And we want to start paying attention to this historical fact here, that in 1838, the Duc de Choiseul was later elected as the Grand Master of the Order of the Temple, but he died that very same year, bringing out the fact that in its early origins with these conflicts and breakouts, the issue of espionage in the military order of Freemasonry or Knights Templarism, it started to exist. It was already there. I wanted to highlight that before we would start looking at situations and things happening in Africa, such that what happened is that the Order of the Temple broke now into 2 branches. You see it, because there wasn't a clear succession from Fabo Palapat to his next successor now. The group now called the Order Souverain de Militaire du Temple of Jerusalem, the OSMTJ, was formed out of it, which we explain that, we'll just read from the slides essentially, that Sir Sidney himself, he declined to take over the Order of the Temple, which put Palapat in a situation where he didn't have a successor. So the regency of the Order of the Temple was passed on to a Josephine Peladan, who later amalgamated the group with other occult groups that were taken over by an individual named Papus, which is actually an alias. And that individual eventually led to groups being incorporated in Belgium known as the OSMTJ. As well, there's another side group, which we really need to know that, which takes us now to Africa, called the Order Souverain du Temple Initiatique, or the Sovereign Order of the Initiatory Temple OST, which now, as a breakout branch, it was able to establish itself on our continent. Now, well, I don't know if I can take a brief break to maybe drink some. To this slide, it will be made mostly a lot of photographs. I think I was supposed to finish at 13 after, so that we can just run into that, please.
Okay, Brother Fokwa, you can take a break as Brother Christian give us an interlude if he's capable. Probably, Brother Christian, you can replay before. So that Brother Fokwa can take some water. So be prepared, comrades here, to follow up this conversation. And then later on, you can now come in with questions and answers. So, Brother Christian, get us an interlude.
The time for chess is over. Hallelujah, the angels sing. It is well the better place. Oh, Africa, Africa must unite. For united we stand, divided we fall. Oh, Africa, Africa must unite. For united we stand, divided we fall. Africa must unite, for united we stand, divided we fall. Oh Africa, I'm calling all Africa. We got to be together.
We got to suffer together too, King.
Music is love, and love is music. If you know what I mean, I say Africa must unite. Oh, Africa, Africa must unite. For united we stand, divided we fall. Oh, Africa, Africa must unite. For united we stand, divided we fall. Music is love, and love is music. If you know what I mean, I say Africa must unite. Love is all I have to give. Love is all as long as I live. Oh, Africa, Africa must unite. For united we stand, divided we fall. Oh, Africa, Africa must unite. For united we stand, divided we fall. Oh, Africa, Africa, Africa must unite. For united we stand, divided we fall. Oh, Africa.
Thank you, Brother Kwame Christian, for that. Brother Fokwa, was that enough time for you, or we give you some more minutes?
Yes, sir. I'm ready to continue.
Kindly, please proceed.
Thank you very much. So just as we start rounding up, what we are finally seeing is that these organizations that were established in France so long ago, 1800s, 1700s, maybe 300 years ago, and then fed into the background of what was
Sorry, you might want to share your
the
screen
French
again, brother.
Empire. I'm not sharing it. Let me remove that. then escape. Okay, I think we are fine now. Okay, that is
Yes.
good. That is good. Let us go back to yes, this is where we were. We were looking at the breakup of the different groups that formed out of the Order of the Temple. And specifically, I wanted to highlight this point. If you see that I've highlighted it yellow on the screen, that the Order of the Supreme Military Temple Hierophant is the only international Templar order recognized as an NGO in special consultative status with the United Nations Economic and Social Council, that's ECOSOC. This status permits the OSMTH to appoint delegates to the United Nations offices in Geneva, New York, and Vienna. OSMTH supports the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, so that we start to see that we're not just looking at small fraternal social organizations. They have a very high level of influence on the face of the planet because of their past relationship in the founding of Europe specifically. Actually, here we find out that in the handing down of authority, even in this organization, the Grand Mastership, it was passed, it was founded by an individual named Antonio Campello Pinto de Sousa Fontes. And as I'm doing my research, I wasn't able to add all of the details about the De Fontes family, but when you look at their management of the Templar organizations, you start to see a lot of mismanagement. Specifically, there are records that point at the individual Antonio Sousa Fontes as having received certain amounts of money in the name of the order and then not being able to account for them. Certain accusations like this abound in the history of the administration of this order with these individuals, which eventually does lead to another schism. And from my own outlook as a journalist, or looking at past history to formulate contemporary information, I would start to see that in this tradition, as we see a lot of mismanagement in the former French African countries, with these organizations already having this infused in their foundation, it's pretty much part and parcel of the conflict that we are having, such that even if it has this level of authority as it's being administered on our continent, when we see organizations now start to complain, like not organizations but governments, like in Niger, they complain that quasi groups like the Red Cross, all of them, they needed to go. It's because they started to realize that in the entanglement of this symbol that we start to see being reiterated with Knights Templarism and Freemasonry, it always seems to go counter to the development of the people with mismanagement of funds through the individuals that are placed in their government. Essentially, like we're pointing out, there was a schism in the OSMTH because of this financial impropriety, such that an individual, General Antoine, was eventually, they're saying unexpectedly elected, but specifically the Covenant of Paris in September 1970 was held because of the issue that I was pointing out, the financial mismanagement and issues concerning the Santos family. Is it De Santos? Sousa Fontes, yes, Sousa Fontes, the Sousa Fontes family, such that they now transformed from the OSTMH into the OSMTJ, which is the group now that they reincorporated in, was it America, out of the one that had already been formed in Belgium. So you see that they start to make different groups to try and balance out from this mismanagement of the organization. And even the OC now, which we start looking at Raymond Bernard Modern, not Raymond Bernard or Bernard Raymond Fabio Pradapat, but another faction which had existed in this line of breakaway groups of the Order of the Templars. They identified an individual named Raymond Bernard in 1955, and they essentially gave him a mission, which he wrote a book about, called A Secret Meeting in Rome, which I've also put the screenshots there. It sells on Amazon for about $83, in which he detailed that he was charged with bringing the OST, which is the Sovereign Order of the Initiatory Temple, to the public. And this individual is very keen and important because he now travels to Africa with this mandate. And when he creates now this group called CERCES, there is the Center for International Spiritual Research. He uses it in Africa now to actually interact with individuals who were presidents at that time. When you start to see the overlapping of the history, 1966, when we were receiving a lot of independence. In the next slides, we'll talk about de Gaulle and how he had already come to do some work in Brazzaville in 1944. They were actually foundating the network in the background for OST CERCES, Ordre des Templars of France in Africa through the independence scheme. So we would talk a little bit about Raymond Bernard going out quickly because we don't we're pressed for time, that he was originally a legal practitioner. That's the type of mind you have to look at. But he served as the Grand Master of the French-speaking jurisdiction of Amorc. That's the ancient mystical order Rosae Crucis, which is another French fraternity, or it's more styled as a university in France with an international network. So I didn't put the year of his service there, but he served in that position. And it's in serving in that position that he also became an initiate of the Martinist. That was the individual we spoke about, other Papoose, and the Freemasonic and Knights Templars traditions, which is what he wrote the book about, The Secret Meeting in Rome in 1966. And it's because of all of this that he left his position in the Amorc Rosicrucian order, and then took up this commission to found the OST so that he could actually have now, like, essentially be the Grand Master of his own order. And we have a quotation here from A Secret Meeting in Rome and the website that this information is being quoted from the Templar Institute, which is the English version of the organization that he actually created. So like I said, I like to put receipts for this. People should not think I'm fabricating this out of my own mind. And in the Knights Templar tradition, like we started looking at Napoleon right from our first slides now, the cross, it's always been the tradition of this centralized organization, even going now back to the Vatican, because we have to see now that truly the Vatican is still related to these groups, but it allows individuals as knights. You know, a knight had to be knighted by a king, and a king was recognized by essentially the popes or the priests. Napoleon comes now, does away with this, and creates his own Johannite system with all of this. And they also employ this, they call it the Maltese asterisk. It's still a Knights Templar cross, but it's a variation because these angles that you see on it instead bend inward. And when you look at the lapel pins that the senior ranking officials, and like, let's say we're looking at everyone who has been a president of France since the time that Raymond Bernard led this Neo-Templar revival in France of the Order of the Temple. All of the former presidents of France have been members of the Order of the Temple, which we see Raymond Bernard participated right to Emmanuel Macron. And like I said, we have to get this symbol very clear because it's not a rose. In Cameroon, there were a lot of misconceptions that they said it was the Rosicrucian order, but it's because he had served in that group and left out. And like I pointed out, we go for receipts. You see him in African regalia. He came to Africa and really lived it up, enjoyed it. In our next slides, we'll talk about him and his relationship with Paul Biya, and Paul Biya donating him millions of euros and CFA. I don't want to really get ahead of myself because we really want to put all the information, lay the foundation so that our people, as we'll be discussing this topic and information will continue to circulate, they'll see the relationship now, because this is going on in the background. This is not what you know our presidents are doing, but they point out on his own website where his efforts and climb through European mysticism is documented, that in 1959 he was in what? Brazzaville. And that is where we know Charles de Gaulle also came and had to make his grandiose statement. So, like I say, it's really pulling together. I don't know what's happening here. It's like they're not allowing me to click on the, okay, there you go. Okay, now the influence of the Knights Templar, of the Osti tradition. When we saw that the issue was happening in Niger, actually submit to the replacement of Mohamed Bazoum. If you would realize that Joseph Borrell, the individual on our screen, who was the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, was the lead individual in the forefront, calling for the Niger coup leaders to reinstate Bazoum, as well as pioneering for some military action. You see now why also individuals like Ali Bongo, when they were also ousted, they were calling on their friends, because they're all a part of a continuous organization. And you see here Borrell with Mohamed Bazoum, all of them, of course, representative of the Osti, or Order of the Temple, Osti, Knights Templar Freemasonic tradition. Of course, my man from Cameroon, Paul Dia, will definitely feature in the next slides. Ali Bongo, as we pointed out. And even interestingly, we discussed in some past slides where we had some about King Charles III and whether he was a part of the English Grand Lodge of Freemasonry. And I had read articles where even BBC had dismissed it and downplayed it, that he wasn't seeking a relationship in what his uncle, the Duke of Kent, who's the cousin of his mother, was a heading of in England as the present Grand Master of the British Grand Lodge. But incidentally, as I was doing my research, I stumbled across this photo, and it identified that King Charles is a member of the Order of the Temple. So even if we want to start reaching to King Swati III, anyone who you don't see clearly up front, this is where I would definitely want to put them. This is where I would definitely put them. You see every country in the Sahel Alliance now, from Mali, Ibrahim Boubacar Keita, Order of the Temple Osti. Blaise Compaoré from Burkina Faso, once again, you hear Ibrahim Traoré very vocal against these structures, shadow governments, puppets. These are the rhetorics that you keep hearing coming out of individuals from Mali and social media. They've identified this structure. It's in the background. And here we have even last Vincent Bolloré, French businessman. We'll talk a lot about him in our preceding discussions, because he owns the port contracts in Cameroon, Ivory Coast. It's all in the fraternity. They keep it within themselves. Before, you saw Bazoum selling uranium at less than 10% the price, at a ratio of 1 to 100. It's in the fraternity. The fraternity goes back 300 years. So imagine when these former French countries became colonies, the individuals who were members of these orders, who were military leadership that fought immediate civil society or civil service governors, these individuals speculatively, but now with enough evidence, we can confirmingly infer, were in the background establishing these states, such that they've evolved with this network in the background. And if they had bad deals signed 100 years ago, 60 years ago, 200, 300 years ago, some individual who would be allowed to continue to aggrandize the wealth for themselves in protection from this organization would freely allow his family to pilfer the state and then create the whole political structure based on it as well, just as Napoleon did it. So you won't get into the government and its echelons of higher elite authority without being a member of this group, so that you're strategically placed to maintain the hierarchical structure of manipulation and exploitation that our countries were founded with in the first place by these organizations. And just going out at last, finally, what we saw, the resilience of the Sahel Alliance led to finally against this organization, so we should know that it is not impossible to resist it, is that after they stood up and about faced Macron and ECOWAS, which we now see the leadership behind ECOWAS going after them, sincerely is involved in this networking, though we're not looking at the French side of it. The gentleman in French President order of the Temple OST member, President Emmanuel Macron, to decide finally that he will withdraw his military and ambassador from these African countries, proving that we stand up truly, my people. The game is over. We should not feel that these organizations, cryptocracies, shadow governments are above us. If we're able to organize ourselves, understand that they exist, and then position ourselves strategically so that we're able to put forward leadership and have organization and network in the background linked to organizations and individuals in Europe. Because we should not look at Europe as being only structured on this and that there are not going to be opposition forces. It is possible to establish a network that could outmaneuver this system and on our continent and bring us into a clear, conscious future of ourselves as Africans. That's where I want to land with this presentation on the Order of the Temple, that is the Order of the Sovereign Initiatory Temple OST, founded by Bernard Raymond Ferber Palapat. Wow, that was a mouthful.
Thank you very much, Brother Fokwa. I think it deserves a lot of a serious clap and appreciation. So if you're able to do that through the symbols you have, kindly give a to Brother Fokwa. It has been a wonderful presentation. He ends up with a serious rallying call that indeed it is possible if we organize ourselves. So thank you very much, Brother Fokwa, for this. Indeed, I would say it was very enlightening, but allow me give members some opportunity and time to hear what they think about this and what have they grasped from this and what can they relate to this or what can be their contribution. So thank you very much once again, Brother Fokwa, for actually that in research and analysis. You come late, and Brother Gabriel also was there. I think he left. So permit me to go to any member who is, first of all, interested. We are very few. So if you feel that you have a burning issue, raise up your hand so that I can give you an opportunity to just come in immediately as we prepare to have a format of those who can present. Brother Kwame Goza, see you around. What do you have to pick from this? I know we are struggling a lot with some few things in regards to liberation of Africa.
Not very much.
Brother Kwame, what did you say?
I said that
Okay. Oh, let me go to Sister Shola. You've been here also for some time now. Before I come to Brother Kapano. Sister Shola?
Yes, I just have a question that from the little I've gathered, it seems that the idea of Freemasonry allowed Europe to develop their countries. I think they used some of their, those people helped in developing their countries. Based on the speaker's research or investigation, do you think that Africans who have, I know that there are some Freemasons who are in Africa as well, do you think they have used some of that knowledge base to develop or as instruments to begin to develop Africa?
Yes, of course. I think that, I could possibly do some research to get some citations for it, because there are some claims that Osage Kwame Nkrumah also interacted with Prince Hall Masonry while he was in the UK, and then came to Ghana to discover that the country was deeply interested in British Freemasonry. And if you follow the origins of Prince Hall, Freemasonry, the founder was alleged, I think, was supposed to have been a sailor. It was a gentleman who was African descent, who was never actually a slave, because to be a Freemason, that they insisted on you being an individual who was free. So because he had been a sailor, the captain of the ship was willing at one point to give him the initiation into the lodge tradition. And then that's how they say Prince Hall created the tradition that now African Americans were able to participate in. So it's more of a liberation based. Names like Thurgood Marshall, W.E.B. Du Bois. It goes along actually. So if we would take that inference of the speculation, I would just call it that Nkrumah had an interaction with that network and then came back to Ghana with the brilliance of what he intended to do as a liberationist, as a Pan-Africanist, as a visionary, then I could not say that it's not impossible for an individual of very high intelligence, truthfully, to be able to outmaneuver and use perhaps these networks to an advantageous level. It's just unfortunate that when we look at the French countries and their own tradition, which is why I brought out a lot of the history of the financial impropriety, the creation of relics, fabrication of relics. A relic should be something that should exist naturally. It shouldn't be you trying to dubiously make a list to claim things. You understand? Because these lodges in France and even in general, in Cameroon, my own country, we have this concept, even in Europe, they acknowledge the French as being typically somehow unscrupulous. I wouldn't like to use the word corrupt, but if it's someone who's willing to quickly break rules as opposed to bending them, they say the French seem to have that type of tendency. When you see that type of practice brought into what should be a noble practice, because the motto and claims of Freemasonry is that they want to make good men better, essentially. It would show you that if the wrong individuals get into these traditions, because they do give an opportunity for people to, because these are public organizations, as far as you knowing they are there and you can become a member. But our leadership, some of them go to France, they join it as FLU, maybe some of them even in the countries they're there, they join it, and then they use these meeting places and the interactions now counter to what the objectives on paper actually are. So I would like to assume that maybe good people, good men and women, could go into these organizations and use them productively. But for some strange reason, these are our Black brothers and sisters. They've found a loophole in the system which allows them to have unaccountability to the continent, especially in the French side of the traditions. And if you would come to Cameroon and make not Cameroon, Ghana, and make maybe speculations that the current administration might have individuals placed in it, when you compare a country like Ghana and the infrastructure and attempts to even do road networking and certain things with even a country like Cameroon that I'm from, I would honestly say that in the British style of this tradition, knowing that even colonially they allowed indirect rule and recognized the authority of local kings and things, even taking local kings into their tradition. Meanwhile, the French tradition of assimilation was more of suppression, burning, destroying kingdoms. You see it, reducing them in their culture to this more Jesuit type of conformity under the de Gaulle principle. So I see that what we see in French tradition and what we see in English tradition are actually different. But I would like to look at us evolving maybe more African perspective, is that we don't have something like a Grand Lodge de Africa. All of the African lodges, whether French or Britain, are now administered from Europe. So that's where you see the power structure of it is. And I feel that because of that, this keeps our leaders ultimately accountable to that old style of geopolitics, where it's top to bottom, believing the Europeans are superior with their Christianity and their Freemasonic Knights Templar traditions.
Thank you for that, Brother Fokwa. Let me go to Brother David. David, do you have something to say?
Brother Pigeon, before David comes in, can I add something to what Brother Wa has said? If that's okay, I'm happy to wait if you would like me to.
No, kindly proceed. Kindly proceed.
All right, thank you. So Brother Foucault's presentation is drawing our attention what essentially is the shadow government, um, a secret society that is running or are running the colonies from the shadows. Uh, Essentially, it is an imperialist organization. Uh, so its intention is to take over the resources of the country. Now, there was another, I call it secret society, at the time of independence. And sometimes people forget about this. Um, it, it, it was called, it arose from the Russian called Helena Blavatsky. And the society was called, the society believed in what is called theosophy. And they had an organization called the Theosophical Society. The Theosophical Society uh, was there when India got independence in 1947. In fact, members of the Theosophical Society we might say, helped India to get independence in 1947. The Theosophical Society then formed branches across the world, especially in the then colonies. And in Ghana, they also formed a branch. And there was a gentleman called Valvanis from Juche in the Volta region of Ghana. Now Valvanis was a member of the Theosophical Society of Ghana. And long before Nkrumah arrived on the shores of Ghana, then the Gold Coast in 1947, people like Valvanis were active on the ground fighting for the independence of Ghana. And it is this Theosophical Society that later on metamorphosed into what was called the League of Ghana Patriots. Now you recall that Nkrumah himself formed the circle, whose motto was service, sacrifice, and suffering, and they swore allegiance to him. So whilst we take cognizance of what Brother Foucault is telling us, let us also remember that there was an alternative society, secret in some way, that whose objective was the very opposite of the kind of objective that organization like the OSTI had. Thank you.
For that, let me get to Brother David.
So far, so good, my brother. We may proceed.
So good. The information was good. Okay, Brother David. Kwame also said, Kopano, are you able to say something?
Thank you very much. No, I'm still listening.
Okay, the listening is over. It's time for talking. Anyway, on a light note, so Brother Foko is done with his presentation. We're just liking to ask any reaction from his presentation, which is not a must, whether you have a question or your general comment in regards to the presentation. But I can give you time to think about that as I go to Sister Shola, who sent this up. Sister Shola, and welcome, Sister Shaza. Even though you've covered it, but you are welcome. Sister Shola?
Yes, thanks for the opportunity. I just wanted to follow up on the chair's comment on the Theosophical Society. From the little I know about the Theosophical Society, I think their main aim is the study, the scientific way of this, their approach to this, to study of God, who is God. So having that and then saying that they were now involved in how would I put it? Deliberation. I kind of want a little bit clarification on that, the liberation struggles. I would like to hear a little bit more about that.
Brother Kwame?
Yes.
Christian?
Yes. What would you like to hear, brother, Sister Shola? So basically, you are right that the Theosophical Society is a society that was dedicated to uniting religion and philosophy and science. That's correct. Originated from a lady called Helena Blavatsky, who was a Russian. Um, the Theosophical Society believed in the brotherhood of all men and all women. And so they, unlike the OCRs, were on the side of the liberation movement, if you like. And they formed societies across. And in Ghana, they also formed one. This is the Society of Ghana. And there's a gentleman called Valvanis from Georgia who was a member. Uh, and they played a leading role in this. Remember, before Nkrumah arrived in Ghana, then Gold Coast, the movement for liberating the Gold Coast was already underway. Nkrumah was invited by what was it called the Big Six to be the secretary of the party that the Achims had formed. So when Nkrumah came, he joined them. And so people like Valvanis, Charles Heyman, and others, they worked with him. And as I said, this organization later metamorphosed into what was called the League of Ghana Patriots. And yeah, so I don't know what else you want me to say. So
yeah, thank you. I think I missed some of the words, so I just needed that clarification. Thank you so much. Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's fine. The offices of this League of Ghana Patriots was in a part of Ghana called Tudu, which you probably know. And they were not far from the offices of the then Ghana police. I'm talking about the colonial police, I mean. And the point I'm making is that this society was dedicated to the independence of the colonies. And in India in 1947, where the society was very strong, they were part of the struggle for independence. And so you recall that Nkrumah himself uh, borrowed satyagraha from India, which became what Nkrumah called a positive action, or the non-violent movement. And so, yeah, so India's independence in 1947 lighted the way for us. It made the other colonies across the world realize that actually we can be free of colonial rule. And it's 10 years between 47 and 57. Ghana itself, as you know, got independence in 1957. It's 10 years after India. So India, if you like, lit the torch for the decolonization movement across the world. Of course, there are arguments that Gandhi himself was a racist and so on and so forth. But yeah, and so I suppose what I'm saying is that what the Brother Fukua is exposing to us is an organization, it's a militaristic organization, which is part of the state, because that is what it is. From what Brother Fukua is telling us, this organization is part of the state. It's part of the state machinery, whose job it is to subdue us, to dominate us, for our resources. Because that is what this is always about. It's about resources. It's about how can we take your resources for our benefit. See, so that's what it's about. And the point is that, so Brother Fukua is exposing this to us. And I am adding to that and saying that, whilst that is the case, let's also remember that there were also secret organizations, the Theosophical Society, in that sense, who also were fighting for the independence of the then colonial territories. Yeah, thank you.
Yes,
Okay,
I
thank
might
you
I
like
for
mean,
to
that.
for
add something there,
yeah,
if it's
yeah.
possible.
I mean, yeah. If I may just say for that, I mean, for me as a Voltarian from Ghana, Vanis is from my part of Ghana, so I am very proud to be linked with him. By the way, thank you.
Brother
Yeah,
Fokwa?
thank you.
Yes, concerning the Theosophy Society, I just wanted to add, actually, when I started to reflect, as you were pointing out, when I came to Cameroon and I began actually my own studies independently in spirituality, it was after picking up Theosophy brochures. I had an
Mm,
uncle who was reading them. So it was through reading them that I started to get into this depth of knowledge, as you're saying. And I want to link it even to the slides as we were bringing out this point that what Napoleon did is he allowed these Eastern teachings as he went to Egypt and those areas. You see, when we're calling it the Grand Lodge of the Orient is always referred to the Near East and the further areas of continental Asia, which if we see that Rome and the Vatican had established its authority over that territory and the people for a very long time, keeping them away from this knowledge of which the rest of the world operated under. The church called essentially what Theosophy was teaching a cult. But we Africans, we people of India, people of Asia, even the Americans, they would have regarded this as just simply naturalist spirituality. You know, they were just looking at it maybe as just spirituality. And Madame Helena, actually, she published a text in 1888 called The Secret Doctrine, which, if you've ever been able to look at it as I reflect, it does actually bring out a clear, harmonious philosophy of what they call the root races. And it explains that even the dark-skinned race actually was the founding race, I think, of ancient Egypt and civilization. She makes these clear statements there, as opposed to a time, if you're looking at it in the late 1800s, when the mentality coming out of France and England was extremely racist, based on this whole belief that they had come to civilize us and all of these things. So it's really important. But I think our brother Kwame pointed out that this theosophy, if we look at those type of organizations, we see that, like you were pointing out, the militaristic aspect of Freemasonry and Knights Templars is what makes it contradictory to our development aspirations. But there's even another group like the Rosicrucian Order, Amor. They were also founded in Europe around the time of Masonry, and they are this group you see that this gentleman, Raymond Bernard, was first a member of, and then he left that group to form his own organization in the militaristic bank network. So many of these individuals look at not the militaristic aspect, just natural laws. It teaches how individuals can come together spiritually and harmonize their consciousness. That when individuals bring their minds together to act in unison, it actually has some metaphysical effect on increasing the physical chances of these things happening. I think as we get into conscientism, we'll start to see some of these concepts being weighed out in some of the later chapters, so that you see that there's a power in knowledge. There's a power in understanding reality that these individuals in these groups have led themselves to, which the greater body of Africans staying in the level of Christian understanding of spirituality is not going further to embrace, because the Roman Catholic tradition is anything Eastern mystic that would be theosophic, like that we see individuals like Krumah, even Gandhi, were able to exploit, to lift themselves up. Yoga, just some of these basic things in Hinduism that you would see an average African would be afraid of. That even when you study Yoruba Ifa, they also use the energy points they call chakra and things of this nature. You start to see a harmonization in our spiritual system clearly through theosophy with what we have from India. And if we could build on something like that, even creating our own consciousness as a system, then it could bring us something which is not militaristic, which is not Christian quasi-Catholic, but gives Africans the right to express their indigenous conscious reality in harmony with these Greco-Roman Abrahamic systems. That's my own reflections that I was inspired from what
So
Can I
based
just
on that,
then add? Sorry.
based on that, brother Farquhar, so based on this discussion, do you think that an in-depth research into theosophy, would appeal to the grassroots African more than the Freemasonry, because the Freemasonry is considered a no-go area because most people do not understand what it is. So do you think an in-depth study, or, I know it's already there, but this doing more of a presentation that includes the various aspects of theosophy could appeal to the grassroots, and then linking that to the liberation of Africa, which is why we are here?
Yes, I can agree with that. I'll be very, very honest, because when they say theosophy, it's bringing two words together. Theos, I think that would be Greek for essentially its conception of God, and then when they add now Sophia, wisdom. So is the wisdom and love of the wisdom of God, the source of existence. So when you take it now in that context, you see Blavatsky was not trying to create a religion, but to identify that this natural law understanding can be actually grouped together and scientifically approached and studied universally by any group, which is why you see some of our foundation teachings go exactly in the direction that you were saying. I think it would be fair for us to use theosophy and maybe build on top of that if we were looking for something that we know is already in the public mainstream and would easily be identified with. For me,
Can I add to that? And let those of us here know that I was introduced to Constantism. I was also introduced to theosophy. I don't think I've ever mentioned this before. So the text that you mentioned, Brother Foucault, the Secret Doctrine, I have copies of them. They are available. Anybody wants to buy them, they are available on Amazon. You can buy them. Although I'm not a member of the Theosophical Society as such, but I have the book, and I have the book because the gentleman who mentored me, the late Charles Heyman, into Constantism, because he's the one that told me when I was searching for answers many, many years ago, after I returned from South Africa, and I was looking for answers to what Nkrumahism was. It was Charles Heyman who told me. I went to his house at Techi, and that's where he told me that, my son, if you want to know what Constantism is, if you want to know what Nkrumahism is, read Constantism. That's what he told me. Those were his words. And then he added, Nkrumahism is Constantism. And so for the first time, when I was looking for answers, one of the fathers of if you like, the liberation movement, because his brother was the guy called Eric Heyman, and Eric Heyman was one of the three that ruled Ghana when Nkrumah was out of the country, and Eric Heyman is his senior brother, and so some of those who are around Nkrumah, if you like, were readers of theosophy. And so Sister Shola's point about perhaps this is what my appeal to the grassroots, I have never thought about it. And as Sister Shola has mentioned it, it set me thinking. Because theosophy, as Brother Foucault has also confirmed, brings together three things: uh, theology, philosophy, and science. So it unifies them. But in terms of humanity, the Theosophical Society believes in the brotherhood of all men, of all human beings. And that is important. And that is why, for them, the domination, colonial domination or imperialist domination, is not right. And that is why they were pivotal or were part of the struggle for independence in India. And as I said, in Ghana, once that word went out, that the theosophical societies should help fight for independence. And so before Nkrumah arrived, these were the brothers and sisters waiting in Ghana for him when he arrived. So Nkrumah came into the Gold Coast with a group of people like Charles Heyman, Balvanis, and others. I mean, there are others who were all ready to help him fight for the independence of Ghana. And so maybe Sister Shola's point is valid that perhaps Brother Fukua, through your presentation, perhaps we may come to an understanding that maybe one of the things we need to take to the people, because our people love God so much, can't go anywhere in Ghana with Africa without God. In the Akan tradition, there's a saying that meaning if you want to speak to God, speak to the wind. So there is all that. So there is a God thing in the atmosphere so much that perhaps we can't mobilize the people without invoking some kind of God. And if you will recall, during the struggle for independence, when Tom Mboya, for instance, I think when he was arrested, but the pigeons are correct, during the independence movement, Tom Mboya was arrested. And when he was arrested, other members, they fasted, they prayed and fasted for him. So, and they called on the African God to free Tom Mboya in Kenya, and so on and so forth. So when Brother Koko, when they ran their meeting last Sunday, this issue came up, that can the state be secular? In other words, can we have a state which doesn't promote Christianity, Islam, traditional African religion, and so on? And one of the things that came up was that our fathers, when they were fighting for independence, used religion. They used Christianity and so on. Anyway, I think I've said a lot. Let me pause there. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Kwame. Before I give Brother Coco, we only have 5 minutes to go. I'll take maybe 1 minute out of the 5 minutes to say what I want to say. Then I'll give Brother Coco probably 2 minutes out of that. Now, I have never known of what you call theosophy or whatever. I first of all got introduced to consciousness, and I've liked what I've been listening and understanding. But I have followed closely Sister Brother Christian. Just permit my ignorance. I'll follow closely with Sister Wangari on the history of Mau Mau, and it's very clear when I talk to some of them that they actually depended on their God, the religious aspect or the spirituality aspect. That it happened even one day when they were faced with a white man from the other side, close proximity, they all knelt down to pray, and the rain came that divided them and their enemy. The other side was rain on for over close to a day, while this side was not having any rain, and they moved. And all along, they observed the purity, the sacrifices, and anything that could happen. They had the intercessors, they had the head of spirituality in the all Mau Mau struggle. And therefore, that's why they had even the oathing, which I wanted to ask if that also made it more sacred society. But they were also oathing, there were prayers, sacrifices, and intimate prayers. So maybe I'll really be interested to listen to that, what you've said, the definition, so that I can be able to learn it better. But let me give Brother Coco or 2 of my minutes, and then we end up. Brother Coco?
Thank you, comrades. And thank you, Brother Ngani. Excellent presentation again. Unfortunately, I was late today, but there are a couple of things that I want a couple of remarks that I want to make. One of them is that we know about the International Court for Settlements, which now is a seat within the World Bank, and that is typical of what was being done with this, I would say, shadow organizations because nobody seems to know about this organization, this court, this arbitration court, and is the one that's instrumental in implementing or upholding the rules or the laws which were done a long time ago when these organizations went into Africa first. So, which meant after colonialism ended, lots of these organizations, they continued owning lots of our resources and we couldn't get them back. And they make a specific case about the Italian company which sued the South African government about black empowerment. This is exactly what the Templars or whatever you call them run the show. For me, I know we would like to say, okay, associations, there have been some associations that have been good, some organizations that have been good, but there is always something to do with elitism, elitist about it. So they are all about elites. And it's the same thing which our Pan-African brother in Italy, Mohamed Konare, says. He says the elites are actually running the show and the elites are depopulating Africa. I don't know if it's a question, but it's an observation, which I'm glad that some of the presentations that Badam Nganu is doing are bringing to the fore. It's all about elites versus everybody else. It's a last struggle again, as our ancestor, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah observed. Many thanks.
That's
Thank
the
you.
word, my
We
brother.
are
Class struggle.
We are actually, yes, I wanted to mention that because Brother Dr. Kwame Nkrumah talked about elitism as one of the problem in Africa, of course, in his class struggle. So I want to bring it to an end with a word from Brother Christian Kwame as we bring this meeting to an end, and looking forward to proceed with this maybe next time. Brother Christian Kwame?
Yeah, brother Pigeon, thank you so much for doing a wonderful sharing job again. It's always refreshing to have you sharing meetings and events. So thank you very much. Yes, the meeting has come to an end, our Saturday, and once again we thank our own brother who we love so much, Fukua, for his presentation on what essentially is the shadow government running Africa. And I think what Brother Fukua is telling us is that if we want the continent to unite, we have to take on the shadow government. Is that possible? Brother Fukua says yes. And Brother Fukua says Niger has been able to do it. So that is something that CSG must consider. Now, in terms of going forward, we have Brother Fukua who will present again. We have Brother Pigeon's second presentation on Matigari, the freedom fighter who returned to take over his property and found it taken over by thieves. He was in a prison where they remembered where they prayed something akin to the Lord's Prayer and called for the kingdom to come. And you all recall that Kwame Nkrumah also used the Christian, if you like, a theme of seek ye first the political kingdom, and all of that things will be added onto you. But we are now in the stage of seek ye first the economic kingdom, because now we have the political kingdom. Yes, the shadow government people are there, but the way to dislodge them is for us to go for the economic kingdom. So going forward, we have a lot of presentations coming up. Our own brother, Senator Komichi of Zimbabwe, is also going to present. So, in fact, it's looking really good. And on Thursday, we'll meet once again to discuss the philosophy and ideology of Pan-Africanism called consensusism. And for us, that is where it all starts. So thank you very much for coming. Have a wonderful week. Zashola, it was good to have you again with your incisive questions. So Danbele, Shaza, Coco, Kopano, Brother Pigeon yourself, and Brother Fukua, thank you all very much. I will Yes, Brother Pigeon.
Yeah, allow me
Yes, Brother
mention
Pigeon.
some two. Allow me mention some two important
Yes,
things.
yeah, please.
One
Just
is
so you
that,
know, after you do, I'll just start the music, and then that's the end of the meeting. Anyone wants to leave can leave whilst the music is playing. Thank you.
okay, one is that as a CSG, we have started a research group. So we also want to call on those people who can volunteer enough to help us in research and data that can actually justify some of the few things that come across. So this month we are doing an educational research, and you have people volunteer to do that research for a month. So we are welcoming more people who will be volunteer because we want to build data for this class and research for this class that can help us pursue our vision. A second thing is that I started a voluntary language class because you see we also struggle for the liberation and unification. So we started as a CG where I'm chairing a Kiswahili language class so that we can also be able to the continent of the one language. These are part of the initiative we are expanding as a class so that this class is taught for action so that we can completely move to action through the inspiration and the reading of Kwame Nkrumah. Thank you very much, Brother Kwame. I thought it was important to mention that.
Very important. And Brother Pigeon, I've got a sister, Fua, who wants to be part of the a research platform. So I'm going to either forward her to you or add her to the group. Thank you very much. So here goes the music. So the meeting.